I'm okay. All is very well, peaceful. Had a little sprinkle of rain. It was a dousing. Uh, I tune into KLW News for some awesome surrounding everything. It covers everything. Um, I feel good. I'm anchored here. Anchored in Long Beach. Later, Yolanda Vega. And the next ball up is 1. And the next ball up is 7. I'm Yolanda Vega. And today's pick 2 numbers are 1, 7. Coffee. Gappy, photography. Just like that. Gappy, photography. Coffee and get back. And here we are. Digital Hub / War Room. The Info TV War Room. TV Live. La la la. Whatever. Just a joker. A midnight joker. Ba 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 ba. Reading. Testing, testing. 0 people involved. 6 minutes. Going to do page 60. Real examples of a shift in policy makers. Emphasis appearing. It is no coincidence that in 2019, a country placed in the top 10 ranking of the World Happiness Report unveiled a well-being budget. The Prime Minister of New Zealand's decision to earmark money for social issues such as mental health, child poverty, and family violence made well-being an explicit goal of public policy. In so doing, Prime Minister Ardern turned into policy what everybody has known for years, that an increase in GDP does not guarantee an improvement in living standards and social welfare. Middle of page 60. Additionally, several institutions and organizations ranging from cities to European Commission are Additionally, several institutions and organizations ranging from cities to the European Commission are reflecting on options that would sustain future economic activity at a level that matches the satisfaction of our material needs with the respect of our planetary boundaries. The line word mouth. Additionally, several institutions and organizations ranging from cities to European Commission are reflecting on options that would sustain future economic activity at a level that matches the satisfaction of our material needs with the respect of our planetary boundaries. The municipality of Amsterdam is the first in the world to have formally committed to this framework as a starting point for public policy decisions in the post-pandemic world. The framework resembles a donut. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Resembles a donut. Resembles a donut. Resembles a donut. The framework resembles the municipality of Amsterdam is the first in the world to have formally committed to this framework as a starting point for public policy decisions in the post-pandemic world. The framework resembles a donut in which the inner ring represents the minimum we need to lead a good life as enunciated by the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and the outer ring, the ecological ceiling defined by Earth system scientists, which highlights the boundaries not to be crossed by human activity, to avoid environmentally negative impact on climate, soil, oceans, the ozone layer, fresh water, and biodiversity. In between the two rings is the sweet spot, or dough, where our human needs and those of the planet are being met. Top of page 61. Coffee. Here in the desert Oaks Nest, eating COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Maurer. Forum Publishing in June of 2020. I do not own any copyrights. This is for educational and non-monetized purposes. We do not know, and comments are encouraged of any kind ever on this content or your experience of it. Copy, photocopy. Squares, Mr. Squirrely. Page 61. Simmons. Glad you're okay. Love the shirt. Yes, this is from Shannon Lee, Bruce Lee's daughters, BruceLee.com. There's a lot of awesome products. T-shirt. Here is this T-shirt, and I forget the name of it, but it is freaking cool. I believe there's a back to it. This was a digital war investment. Thank you very much. Shannon, or whoever's running that. Bought a bunch of stuff, probably too much stuff. Oh. This is from Bruce Lee. I never took it out. I did break it within its package because I was flying it. It's some kind of Bruce Lee plane. Sorry. Broke something off. I was just pointed in the direction the planes go, the southern trajectories. Anyway, wherever you go, there you are. Oh, crap! Blew up an engine. Damn it! Get a replicator on that. Alright, very cool, very cool, very cool. I like it. These are like, I call them like artifacts, war artifacts. I've just been looking at them high, they get disappeared. And anyway, back to it. This freaking mission here. Mission Impossible, page 61. We do not know yet whether the tyranny of GDP growth will come to an end, but different signals suggest that the pandemic may accelerate changes in many of our well-entrenched social norms. If we collectively recognize that beyond a certain level of wealth, defined by GDP per capita, happiness depends more on intangible factors such as accessible healthcare and a robust social fabric than on material consumption, then values as different as a respect for the environment. Responsible eating, empathy, or generosity may gain ground and progressively come to characterize the new social norms. Beyond the immediate ongoing crisis in recent years, the role of economic growth in advancing living standards has varied depending on context. In high-income economies, productivity growth has been steadily declining since the 1970s, and it has been argued that there are currently no clear policy avenues for receiving long-term growth. In addition, don't spill on the Magnum PI Ferrari. My computer. It's not even that cool. It's just cool. It's just a nice. It's well done. Well done. Bravo. Bravo. My pants aren't really pants anymore. Chop them off with scissors. I can't say that way. Come on, dude. Like everything hurts. Well, I've been busy. I got some sleep. 5 hours or so. But you get some heat exhaustion. I didn't get enough sun. Enough sun means like things didn't get charged up as much. Rocking 43%, it should be 100,000%. Well, that was for you, but somewhere on page 61. Am I done? Oh my God, 61. Beyond the immediate ongoing crisis in recent years, the role of economic growth in advancing living standards has varied depending on context. In high-income economies, productivity growth has been steadily declining since the 1970s. And it has been argued that there are currently no clear policy avenues for receiving long-term growth. Reference number 36. Perfect time to try something. No, it's not. Just focus. Reference number 36. Whoa. Really cool. Armrest. So for example, still not done with page 61. We're getting there. Alrighty then. GI Live, American Hits of World War III. In high-income economies, productivity growth has been steadily declining since the 1970s, and it has been argued that there are currently no clear policy avenues for reviving long-term growth. Source number 36. In addition, the growth that did materialize disproportionately accrued to individuals at the top end of the income distribution. A more effective approach may be for policymakers to target welfare enhancing interventions more directly. Source number 37. Don't look at that. Look at that. Don't look at that. In low and middle income countries, the benefits of economic growth have lifted millions out of poverty in large emerging markets. The policy options to boost growth performance are better known, for example, addressing basic distortions Yet new approaches will have to be found as the manufacturing-led development model is fast losing its power. With the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, source number 38, page 62. This leads to the second key question around future growth. If the direction and quality of economic growth matter as much as, or perhaps even more than, its speed, what are likely to be the new drivers of this quality in the post-pandemic economy? Several areas have the potential to offer an environment capable of boosting a more inclusive and sustainable dynamism. The green economy spans a range of possibilities from greener energy to ecotourism to the circular economy. For example, shifting from the take, make, dispose approach to production and consumption to a model that is a restorative and regenerative by design. Source number 39. Can preserve resources and minimize waste by using a product again when it reaches the end of its useful life, thus creating further value that can in turn generate economic benefits by contributing to innovation, job creation, and ultimately growth. Companies and strategies that favor repairable products with longer lifespans, from phones and cars to fashion, that even offer free repairs like Patagonia outdoor wear, and platforms for trading used products are all expanding fast. Source number 40. The social economy spans other high growth and job creating areas, the fields of caregiving and personal services, education, and health. Investment in childcare, care for the elderly, and other elements of the care economy would create 13 million jobs in the US alone. Crap. Page 62 somewhere. Patagonia outdoor wear. The platforms for trading used products are all expanding fast. Source number 40. The social economy spans other high growth and job creating areas in the fields of caregiving and personal services, education and health, investment in childcare, care for the elderly, and other elements of the care economy would create 13 million jobs in the US alone and 21 million jobs in 7 economies. It will lead to a 2% rise in GDP growth in the countries studied. Source number 41. Education is also an area of massive job creation, particularly when considering primary and secondary education, technical and vocational education, training, university and adult training together, health, as the pandemic has demonstrated, requires much greater investment both in terms of infrastructure and innovation as well as human capital. These three areas create a multiplier effect, both throughout their own employment potential and the long-term benefits they unleash across societies in terms of equality, social mobility, inclusive growth. Innovation in production, distribution, and business models can generate efficiency gains and newer, better products that can create higher value headed, leading to new jobs and economic prosperity. Governments thus have tools at their disposal to make the shift towards more inclusive and sustainable prosperity, combining public sector direction setting and incentives with commercial innovation capacity through a fundamental rethinking of markets and their role in our economy and society. This requires investing differently and deliberately in the frontier markets outlined above, areas where market forces could have a transformative effect on economies and societies, but where some of the necessary preconditions to function are still lacking. For instance, technical capacities to sustainably produce a product or asset at scale are still insufficient. Standards are not well defined, or legal frameworks are not yet well developed, shaping the rules and mechanisms of these two new markets. Can have a transformational impact on the economy if governments want to shift to a new and better kind of growth. They have a window of opportunity to act now, to create incentives for innovation and creativity in the areas outlined above on page 63. Following on page 64, COVID-19, the Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Valeray from publishing. I own no copyright. I'm not monetized. For educational purposes only, for Socratic debate and conversation, for radar dropping on live or future, present, or split stream timeline chats. Page 64. Some have called for degrowth, a movement. Clap off. Clap off, clap off. My neighbor's gonna hate it. There we go. There we go. Excuse myself. I'm scared the shit out of myself. Hold on. I'm running this up with the sun. Come on, don't waste my power, soldier. What kind of soldier are you? What are you? What are you? What are you, a snowflake? Huh? Get back into a freezer if you can. Good luck. It's hot out there. Page 64. Some have called for degrowth, a movement that embraces zero or even negative GDP growth. That is gaining some traction, at least in the richest countries. The clapper, yes, it's a clapper. It's a clapper. You kidding me? Yeah, it's a clapper. Just got it. I love it. It's listening to me. I'm sure it's China's like spy box, but it's cool. I wonder how much power it sucks. I should try and put it into my power box from the sun. Powered by the sun. What are we powering by the sun right now? Nothing. I was powering this little blue light, but even that I didn't want to do. So that's just hardwired. Because guess what? This is important, guys. Guys, stop calling me guys. You know what I mean? Humans. Yeah, man. I think. I don't know. Better identify yourself. Identify yourself. Are you human? Robot. Ba-ba-da. I don't know. No, page 64. Interrupted by a split screen. Live. Yeah, with Digital Hawk Live at 12:23 a.m. Sunday, 22nd of August, 2021. Alrighty then. Well, alright then, partner. Well, swing your partner round and round. Swing your partner round and round. Does it tell your partners? What partner? Oh, there. That's the source of my confusions. No, it isn't. Uh-uh. One of them. I already did that. Hey, back. Oh man, I want to flip my drone. I think it would be a terrible idea. Don't even try. Why would this is not metal, by the way. I am. This is a bubble at the moment because it's hyperinflated. It's pressurized, I believe. Somewhat pressurized, yes. 64 degrees on the page. Oh, page 64 degree. Page 64, excuse me. Somewhere on it. We are coming right back to it. And here we are. Here we are, landing into target. Not Target, the retailer. I wonder if I can make things float inside here. Hold on. Nope. Not yet. Needs some beetle shells. Hold on. Where the heck was it? Lad. As the critique of as the critique of economic growth moves to center stage, consumerism, financial and cultural dominance in public and private will be overhauled. Source number 42. This is made obvious in consumer-driven degrowth activism, in which niche segments, like advocating for less meat or fewer flights, by triggering a period of enforced degrowth. The pandemic has spurred renewed interest in this movement that wants to reverse the pace of economic growth, leading more than 1,100 experts from around the world to release a manifesto in May 2020, putting forward a degrowth strategy to tackle the economic and human crisis caused by COVID-19. Source number 43. Their open letter calls for the adoption of a democratically planned yet adaptive, sustainable, and equitable downscaling of the economy, leading to a future where we can live better with less. However, beware of the pursuit of degrowth, proving as directionless as the pursuit of growth. Exclamation. The most forward-looking countries and their governments will instead prioritize a more inclusive and sustainable approach to managing and measuring their economies. One that also drives job growth, improvements in living standards, and safeguards the planet. The technology to do more with less already exists. Source number 44. There is no fundamental trade-off between economic, social, and environmental factors. If we adopt this more holistic and longer-term approach to defining progress and incentivizing investment in green and social Frontier markets, page 65. 1.2.3. Fiscal and monetary policies. The fiscal and monetary policy response to the pandemic has been decisive, massive, and swift. It was given to me by Angel, the clapper. Not the clap, the clapper. Clap on, clap up. Clap on, clap. Ooh, there's lights. Mm-mm. 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 Oh, I can see it right there. Okay. 1.2.3. Page top up. 65. And this was at 12:29 a.m. 75 degrees in Long Beach, Nueva York. That's New York. New York. Lots of stuff going on. Lots of water stuff. The fiscal and monetary policies. The fiscal and monetary policy response to the pandemic has been decisive, massive, and swift. In systematically important countries, central banks decided almost immediately the banks, central banks, decided almost immediately after the beginning of the outbreak to cut interest rates while launching large quantitative easing programs, committing to print the money necessary to keep the cost of government borrowing low. The U.S. Fed undertook so to buy treasury bonds and agency mortgage-backed securities, while the European Central Bank promised to buy an instrument that governments would issue. A move that succeeded in reducing the spread in borrowing costs between weaker and stronger Eurozone members. Concomitantly, most governments launched ambitious and unprecedented fiscal policy responses. Urgent and expansive measures were taken very early on during the crisis with three specific aims. One, fight the pandemic with as much spending as required to bring it under control as rapidly as possible through the production of tests, hospital capabilities, research in drugs and vaccines, etc. Number two, provide emergency funds to households and firms on the verge of bankruptcy and disaster. And three, support aggregated demand so that the economy can operate as far as possible close to potential source number 45. Top of page 66 of COVID-19 agreements with Klaus Schwab and Klaus Schwab and Thierry Maurer of publishing. I own and own no copyright, non-monetized. Reading for Socratic debate and discussion, future, present, and any timeline, trajectory, or technique, or whatever. You know what I mean. Page 66. These measures will lead to very large fiscal deficits with a likely increase in debt to GDP ratios of 30% of GDP in the rich economies. At the global level, at the global level, I can't do this. Doing. I'm already doing. I did it. It's done. We're going to in 5 seconds. Yeah, hello, the clapper. I didn't think this one either. Yesterday I got one. I didn't buy it. It was a gift from an angel. So, or sold them really. Yeah, I don't know. It was in a time capsule. LOL, laugh a lot. Ha ha ha. Boop, bop, boop. Page 66. Let's take it from the top. Page 66. This guy can't do this. I don't know. Digital Hawk. What's your name? These measures will lead to very large fiscal deficits. With a likely, oh, he has a vaping problem, doesn't he? And that's really all people. Just too many. Sibilance. Too many. Okay, fine. These measures will lead to very large fiscal deficits. Wow! 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 Large fiscal deficits. Okay. Two people. Thumbs up to the Hawks reading. COVID-19, the Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. Theory, Mallory, Boom, position, right? Goodbye. Yourself about a very innocent lake, very nice color, very nice film. Very smart, brilliant man, mechanical engineer. The beginning. I digress. Because I'm trying to read one page at a time, one word at a time. These measures will lead to very large fiscal deficits, with a likely increase in debt to GDP ratios of 30% of GDP in rich economies. At the global level, the aggregate stimulus from government spending will likely exceed 20% of global GDP in 2020, with significant variation across countries, ranging from 33% in Germany to more than 12% in the US. This expansion of fiscal capabilities has dramatically different implications depending on whether the country concerned is advancing, emerging, or emerging. High-income countries have more fiscal space because a higher level of debt should prove sustainable and entail a viable level of welfare. Costs for future generations for too higher level of debt should prove sustainable and entail a viable level of welfare. Cost for future generations for two reasons. One, the commitment from central banks to purchase whatever amount of bonds it takes to maintain low interest rates. And two, the confidence that interest rates are likely to remain low in the foreseeable future because uncertainty will continue hampering private investment and will justify high levels of precautionary savings. In contrast, the situation couldn't be starker in emerging and developing economies. Most of them don't have the fiscal space required to react to the pandemic shock. They're already suffering from the major capital outflows and a fall in commodity prices, which means their exchange rate will be hammered if they decide to launch expansionary fiscal policies. In these circumstances, help in the form of grants and debt relief and possibly an outright moratorium, source number 46, will not only be needed, but will be critical. These are unprecedented programs for an unprecedented situation. Something so new that the economist Carmen Reinhardt has called it a, quote, whatever it takes moment for large scale, outside the box fiscal and monetary policies, and source number 47. Measures that would have seemed inconceivable prior to the pandemic may well become standard around the world as governments try to prevent the economic recession from turning into a catastrophic depression. Increasingly, there will be calls for government to act as a payer of last resort. Source number 48. Copyright last resort. So, yeah. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Are you still there? Page 67. Ah, crap. A payer of last resort. Source number 48. To prevent or stem the spate of mass layoffs and business destruction triggered by the pandemic. All these changes are altering the rules of the economic and monetary policy game. The artificial barrier that makes monetary and fiscal authorities independent from each other has now been dismantled, with central bankers becoming, to a relative degree, subservient to elected politicians. It is now conceivable that in the future government will try to wield its influence over central banks to finance major public projects, such as an infrastructure or green investment fund. Similarly, the precept that government can intervene to preserve workers' jobs or incomes and protect companies from bankruptcy may endure after these policies come to an end. It is likely that that public and political pressures to maintain such schemes will persist, even when the situation improves. One of the greatest concerns is that this implicit cooperation between fiscal and monetary policies leads to uncontrollable inflation. It originates in the idea that policymakers will deploy massive fiscal stimulus and that will be fully monetized. For example, not financed through standard government debt. This is the title, chapter, content of Macro Reset. Continuing on to page 68. 19 degree reset, Schwab and Peter already publishing. This is for educational purposes only. For debate, comment, and questions about or for the authors or the publisher. This is where modern monetary theory, top of page 68, MMT, and modern monetary theory, MMT, and helicopter money come in. With interest rates hovering around zero, central banks cannot stimulate the economy by classic monetary tools. For example, a reduction in interest rates, unless they decide to go for deeply negative interest rates. A problematic move resisted by most central banks. Source number 49. The stimulus must therefore come from an increase in fiscal deficits, meaning that public expenditure will go up at a time when tax revenues decline. Put in the simplest possible, and in this case, simplistic terms, MMT, or modern monetary theory, MMT, modern monetary theory, MMT, modern monetary theory. runs like this. Governments will issue some debt that the central bank will buy. If it never sells it back, it equates to monetary finance. The deficit is monetized by the central bank purchasing the bonds that the government issues, and the government can use the money as it sees fit. It can, for example, metaphorically drop it from helicopters to those people in need. The idea is appealing and realizable, but it contains a major issue of social expectations and political control. Once citizens realize that that money can be found on a quote magic money tree, end quote, elected politicians will be under fierce and relentless public pressure to create more and more, which is when the issue of inflation kicks in. 1.2.3.1. Deflation or inflation? Question mark. Two technical elements embedded in the issue of monetary finance are associated with the risk of inflation. First, the decision to engage in perpetual quantitative easing, for example, in monetary finance, doesn't have to be taken when the central bank buys the debt issued by the government. It can be left to the contingent. Page 69. Two technical elements embedded in the issue monetary finance are associated with the risk of inflation. First, the decision to engage in perpetual quantitative easing, for example, in monetary finance, doesn't have to be taken when the central bank buys the debt issued by the government. It can be left to the contingent future to hide or circumvent the idea that money grows on trees. Second, the inflationary impact of helicopter money is not related to whether the deficit is funded or unfunded, but is directly proportional to the amount of money involved. There are no nominal limits to how much money a central bank can create, but there are sensible limits to how much they would want to create to achieve reflation without risking too much inflation. The resultant increase in nominal GDP will be split between a real output effect and increase in price level effect. This balance and its inflationary nature will depend on how tight the supply constraints are. So ultimately on the amount of money created. Central bankers may decide that there is nothing to worry about with inflation at 2% or 3%, and that 4% to 5% is also fine, but they will have to define an upper limit at which inflation becomes disruptive and a real concern. The challenge will be to determine at what level inflation becomes corrosive and a source of obsessive concern for consumers. Page 69, the middle towards bottom last paragraph. For the moment, some fear deflation, while others worry about inflation. What lies behind these divergent anxieties for the future? The deflation warriors point to a collapsing labor market and stumbling commodity prices and wonder how inflation could possibly pick up anytime soon in these conditions. Inflation warriors observe, warriors observe, warriors observe, not warriors, warriors observe the substantial increases in central bank balance sheets and fiscal deficits and ask how these will not one day lead to inflation and possibly high inflation and even hyperinflation and possibly high inflation and even hyperinflation. They point to the example of Germany after World War I, which inflated way away, which inflated away, which inflated away its domestic war debt in the in the in the in the hyperinflation of 1923, or the UK, which eroded with a bit of inflation. The massive amount of debt, 250%, it inherited from World War II. World War II inherited. These worriers acknowledge that in the short term, deflation may be the bigger risk, but argue that inflation is ultimately unavoidable given the massive and inevitable amounts of stimulus. At this current juncture, page 70, at this current juncture, it is hard to imagine how inflation could pick up anytime soon. The reshoring of production activities could generate occasional pockets of inflation, but they are likely to remain limited, limited, remain limited. The combination of potent long-term structural trends like aging and technology both are deflationary in nature, and an exceptionally high unemployment rate that will constrain wage increases for years puts strong downward pressure on inflation. In the post-pandemic era, strong consumer demand is unlikely. The pain inflicted by widespread unemployment, lower incomes for large segments of the population, and uncertainty about the future are likely to lead to an increase in precautionary savings. When social distancing eventually eases pent up demand, it could provoke a bit of inflation, but it is likely to be temporary and will therefore not affect inflation expectations. Olivier Blanchard, the former chief economist of the IMF, thinks that only the combination of the following three elements could create inflation. One, a very large increase in the debt to GDP ratio, larger than the current forecast of 20 to 30%. Debt to GDP ratio, larger than the current forecast of 20 to 30%. Two, a very large increase in the neutral rate, for example, the safe real rate required to keep the economy at potential. And three, fiscal dominance of monetary policy, source number 50. The probability of each individual is already low, so the probability of the three occurring in conjunction with each other is extremely low, but not nil. Bond investors think alike. This could change, of course, but at the moment, the low rate differential between nominal and inflation indexed bonds paints a picture of ongoing very low inflation at best. In the coming years, page 7, high-income countries may well face a situation similar to that of Japan over the The past few decades, structurally weak demand, very low inflation, and ultra low interest rates, the possible Japanification of the rich world is often depicted as a hopeless combination of no growth, no inflation, and insufferable debt levels. This is misleading. When the data is adjusted for demographics, Japan does better than most. Its GDP per capita is high and growing, and since 2007, its real GDP per member of the working age population has risen faster than in any other G7 country. Naturally, there are many idiosyncratic reasons for this, a very high level of social capital and trust, but also labor productivity growth and surpasses the average, and a successful absorption of elderly workers into the labor force. But it shows that a shrinking population doesn't have to lead to economic oblivion. Japan's high living standards and well-being indicators offer a salutary lesson that there is hope in the face of economic hardship. Page 72. 1.2.3.2. The fate of the US dollar. For decades, the US has employed the exorbitant privilege of retaining the global currency reserve, a status that has long been a perk of imperial might and an economic elixir, source number 51. To a considerable extent, American power and prosperity have been built and reinforced by the global trust in the dollar and the willingness of customers abroad to hold it, most often in the form of US government bonds. The fact that so many countries and foreign institutions want to hold dollars as a store of value and as an instrument of exchange for trade has anchored its status as the global reserve currency. This has enabled the US to borrow cheaply abroad and benefit from low interest rates at home, which in turn has allowed Americans to consume beyond their means. It has also made large recent US government deficits possible, permitted the US to run substantial trade deficits, reduce the exchange rate risk, and made the US financial markets more liquid. More liquid. Liquid. Tell me about liquid. Sorry, can you hear me? Roxanne! Ra, da, 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 da. Ow, ow, ow. A perk of imperial might and an economic elixir, source number 51. To a considerable extent, American power and prosperity have been built and reinforced by the global trust in the dollar and the willingness of customers abroad to hold it, most often in the form of US government bonds. The fact that so many countries and foreign institutions want to hold dollars as a store of value, as an instrument of exchange for trade, has anchored its status as the global reserve currency. This has enabled the US to borrow cheaply abroad and benefit from low interest rates at home, which in turn has allowed Americans to consume beyond their means. It has also made large recent US government deficits possible, permitted the US to run substantial trade deficits, reduced the exchange rate risk, and made the US financial markets more liquid. At the core of the US dollar status as a reserve currency lies a critical issue of trust. Non-Americans who hold dollars trust that the United States will protect both its own interests by managing sensibly its economy and the rest of the world as far as the US dollar is concerned by managing sensibly its currency, like providing dollar liquidity to the global financial system efficiently and rapidly. Efficiently and rapidly, you see. Line. Line paste. For quite some time, some analysts and policymakers have been considering a possible and progressive end to the dominance of the dollar. They now think the pandemic might be the catalyst that proves them right. Their argument is twofold and relates to both sides of the trust issue. On the one hand, managing the economy sensibly, doubters of US dollar dominance point to the inevitable and sharp deterioration of the US fiscal position. In their mind, unsustainable levels of debt will eventually erode confidence in the US dollar. Just prior to the pandemic, US defense spending, plus interest on the federal debt, plus annual entitlement payments and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security represented 112% of federal tax receipts versus 95% in 2017. This unsustainable path will worsen in the post-pandemic, post-bailout era. This argument suggests that something major will therefore have to change, either through a much reduced geopolitical role or higher taxation, or both. Otherwise, the rising deficit will reach a threshold beyond which non-US investors are unwilling to fund it. After all, the status of reserve currency cannot last longer than foreign confidence in the ability of the holder to honor its payments. On the other hand, managing the US dollar sensibly for the rest of the world, doubters of the dollar's dominance point to the incompatibility of the status of as a as a global reserve currency with rising economic nationalism at home. Even though the Fed and the U.S. Treasury manage the dollar and its influential and its influential network worldwide with efficacy, skeptics emphasize that the willingness of the U.S. administration to weaponize the U.S. dollar for geopolitical purposes, like punishing countries and companies that trade with Iran and or North Korea, will inevitably incentivize dollar holders to look for alternatives. Are there any viable alternatives? The US remains a formidable global financial hegemon. The role of the dollar in international financial transactions is far greater, albeit less visible, than in international trade, but it is also true that many countries would like to challenge the dollar's global dominance in the short term. There are no alternatives. The Chinese renminbi, RMB term, there are no alternatives. The Chinese renminbi, RMB could be an option, but not until strict capital controls are eliminated and the RMB turns into a market determined currency, which is unlikely to happen. Unlikely to happen in the foreseeable future. The same goes for the euro. It could be an option, but not until doubts about a possible implosion of the eurozone dissipated for good, which again is unlikely process. Which eurozone dissipate for good, which again is an unlikely prospect in the next few years. As for a global virtual currency, there is none in sight yet. But there are attempts to launch national digital currencies that may even eventually dethrone the US dollar supremacy. The most significant one took place in China at the end of April 2020 with a test of a national digital currency in 4 large cities. Source number 52. The country is years ahead of the rest of the world in developing a digital currency. Combined with powerful electronic payment platforms, this experiment clearly shows that there are monetary systems that are trying to become independent from US intermediaries while moving towards greater digitization. Ultimately, the possible end of the US dollar's primacy will depend on what happens in the US, as Henry Paulson, a former US Treasury Secretary, says. US dollar prominence begins at home. Page 75. Continue for page. Can you guess it? 74. That's right. Page 74. H2O, huh? Cayenne pepper, turmeric, and lemon from a plastic lemon from the supermarket. Squeeze bottle. Concentrate or something. Probably fake. I don't know. Snack. From the bears. The bears. Oh no. Wow. There was a whole country in there that was not supposed to be in there. Gonna eat it. Whoa. Got lucky with a cashew. Wow. I'm gonna put the mine on that. And we're almost back. It's like a snake in the grass. And I'm going to take a look at this chat. Oh, crap. D-Her. Pretty sure this guy wants to eat trash. Maybe he could talk to Apple about letting people repair their phones. More woke teachers, I'm sure, is what he means. Stream is for educational and informational purposes. Only comments are encouraged. Is everything a market to this guy, the clapper? I didn't think they still made them or sold them, rather. LOL. Ha ha! This guy is making me angry. Oh, that must be how I consume beyond my means. Healthcare. We're really living in Revenge of the Nerds. Oh, crap. Cool. I want to watch that now. I think I've seen it in its entirety. I'm not sure. Yes, it does sound like yes. Because I was. Okay. He seems to really hate us. Good drink. Turmeric. I had turmeric powder from a jar like this big from the Stop and Shop, and a cayenne pepper powder jar this big like from the Stop and Shop. Where one side you open it, and if you do that, crap, you have the whole bottle dumped into your drink. The other side has a couple little holes in it, and then it never works right, but you dump it in, two little taps. Do little taps and some lemon juice, concentrate, whatever the heck like that. And some filtered, Brita filtered water. And it was toasted up as a boil. But either way, it tastes good. Anise, you can have fun with that. It opens up a lot of. It's just good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. It seems to really hate the US. Good drink. A lot of people don't know how to mix the turmeric with pepper. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I just put it in the freaking cup, put water in it, whatever. With pepper. Sometimes I put black pepper. I don't think that works that well. I don't know. It's sort of like cooler things. Not like just like powdery drinks that I make from the nature. Like boom, 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 boom. Pine needle tea. Got a locate pine needle tea tree. It's a pine tree, dude. I know. I know. Hold on. Hold on. And I'd like to welcome you back to Just where we are reading COVID-19 The Great Reset. Schwab Theory America from publishing by Hallmark Copyrights. And we are here to discuss specifically Hamilton discussions on non-monetized. And I looked at the clock at 1:23 a.m. Long Beach, New York. Current time 1:20 a.m. 75 degrees. Sunday, August 22nd, 2021. Gematria results for 1, 2, 3. God, good. Abraham, Fibonacci, cool. Decius, Angelo, God, good. Alaska, Plan B. Angelina, Nicola, Hidden Hand, Genocide, a Gift, Be a Leader, Mind File. Keisha, Backed. Emilio, Lifelock. Obedient, Gamer, TLC, BH Kids, LifeMind, RNC, Allegria, Melfina, Boogie, King Below, Thea, iPod, Nacho, CSM, Haman, Macri, BFM. Alright, alright, alright. Hello? Is everybody there? This is me, is this you? This is me, is this you? Continue reading from pages. I don't remember. Reflector gadget. Like Patagonia. Oh no. Companies that trade with others. Page 74. The bottom of 74 of COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and Theory, by the way, from publishing. Bottom of page 74. Ultimately, the possible end of the U.S. dollar's primacy will depend on what happens in the U.S. as Henry Paulson, a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, says U.S. dollar prominence begins at home. ... The United States must maintain an economy that inspires global credibility and confidence. Failure to do so will, over time, put the U.S. dollar's position in peril. Source number 53. To large extent, U.S. global credibility also depends on geopolitics and the appeal of its social model, the exorbitant privilege. It's intricately intertwined with global power, the perception of the US as a reliable partner, and its role in the working of multilateral institutions. If that role were seen as less secure than and that security guarantee as less ironclad, because the US was disengaging from global geopolitics in favor of more standalone inward looking policies, the security premium enjoyed by the US dollar could diminish, warns Barry Eichengreen and European Central Bank representatives. Source number 54. Questions and doubts about the future status of the dollar as a global currency reserve are an apt reminder that economics does not exist in isolation. This reality, and particularly harsh in over indebted emerging and poor countries, now unable to repay their debt, often denominated in dollars for them. This crisis will take on huge proportions and years to sort out, with considerable economic damage translating fast into social and humanitarianism pain. In all these countries, the COVID crisis may well end the gradual process of convergence that was supposed to bring highly developed and emerging or developing countries into closer alignment. This will lead to an increase in societal and geopolitical risks, a stark reminder of the extent to which economic risks intersect with societal issues and geopolitics. To be continued. By the dots, what surprised you as the twilight flies with the that a light was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet for the land of the free in the